Security VIP is the official podcast of the security industry, from manufacturers to end users and everything in between. Security VIP is your home for nothing but the truth.
You think you know me?
On this day, I see clear. You're listening to the Security VIP Podcast, hosted by Taylor May, the official podcast of the security industry and home of nothing but the truth. Today on Security VIP, we feature the Director of Security and Emergency Planning of Littleton Public Schools, Michael Newton. Get ready for nothing but the truth.
Security VIP Nation, what is going on? Welcome back to another episode of the Security VIP Podcast, the official podcast of the security industry, and your home for nothing but the truth. As always, I'm your host, Taylor May, and on today's episode, we're featuring the Director of Security and Emergency Planning of Littleton Public Schools, Mr. Michael Newton. Mike, welcome to the podcast today, brother. How are you doing today?
Yeah, I'm doing good, Taylor. How you doing, brother?
Doing good, man. And I'm actually glad to have you on my podcast. I've been itching to have you on my podcast because you know Mike Petranga, you know Rick Francis, and I gotta start the conversation like this, man. It's like something about successful director securities or executive director securities. They all have no hair for whatever reason. They're the most successful. You look at Mike Petranga at Texas City. You looked at Captain Rick Francis at Seminole County Schools. Both those guys got national recognition. And then now look at you leading the state of Colorado, and you don't have any hair. What's the gist, man? I don't know.
Hey, I'd like to say it's possibly the stress of the job. Takes it out after time. But no, and really, I got nothing compared to Mike and Captain Francis down there in Seminole County. What they've accomplished and achieved over these last few years is instrumental in the K through 12 industry.
Yeah, man, 100%. Both of those guys are good dudes, and I want to get more people to know about you because obviously Littleton has its own story, but you're in Colorado. I love the state of Colorado, by the way. A great state. But let's learn more about you first, Mike, and then we'll talk more about what you've done already for LPS. Tell me about Mike Newton.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So for everybody out there, as Taylor mentioned, my name is Michael Newton. I'm currently the Director of Security and Emergency Planning out here in Littleton Public Schools. For everybody else, Littleton Public Schools is a south suburb metro area, the Denver metropolitan area. We're kind of sandwiched and pancaked in between our larger sister districts, Cherry Creek, Jefferson County, and Douglas County school districts. I had a unique path to kind of get to where I am, a little bit different than majority of personnel in my position. In 2012, I actually enlisted in the United States Air Force, kind of went down the path of security forces. I always had the dreams and, ambitions to be law enforcement. During that time, I was stationed at Dyess Air Force Base in the great state of Texas. Huge shout out to you over there.
There we go.
So, I definitely missed it down there. Texas did some great things for me. Loved it. I definitely filled roles of law enforcement patrolman. I was the emergency operations center manager for the night shift crew out there. Oversaw physical security requirements and the electronic security systems for Dyess Air Force Base, which served about 15,000 people in Abilene, Texas. In 2013, I actually deployed in support of Operation Enduring Freedom. And, that's really when my career goals, dreams, and aspirations somewhat shifted more towards the K through 12 industry. As, everybody else is aware, in 2013, we experienced a tragic, active shooting event out here in Centennial, Colorado, which is my home where I was, born, raised, grew up. And, that really hit home. It was close to me and definitely changed where I wanted to go and what my dreams were. When I returned from, deployment, kind of got back to Dyess, and I kind of had that moment of reflection of what do I do from here? My contract's up. Do I re-enlist? Do I start the next phase of my career? And I had an amazing opportunity open up out here for the Colorado Air National Guard, where I was an active guard member. Transitioned over directly to security forces personnel, except for this time, I oversaw standards and evaluations for our flight as well as training. A little bit of a transition right there, but it gave me the opportunity to truly focus on education and professional development to set myself up for success. My predecessor had filled this role for 30 years when he retired, actually last school year. I connected with him and kind of explained my past, where I was, and what I was interested in. Kind of designated or went after certifications to help set myself up for success. I'm a board certified physical security professional and certified protection professional through ASIS International. And that really helped lay the groundwork for me as I transitioned over from the military role. I'm still a reservist, but I was hired on as the assistant director of security for Littleton. And during that time, I really focused on emergency operations planning, kind of unifying our security operations center in here, which we have a proprietary system where we monitor all unified security life safety, fire automation, communications. And I was really kind of in charge of that system and working with our first responding agencies. In 2020, my predecessor actually retired, like I said, after 30 years. And I had the opportunity to move up into that position. And, it really was a dream come true to oversee security and emergency planning out here in Littleton, Colorado, like I said, where I was born and raised. It's definitely been a blessing. Achieved a lot of stuff over the last year. Obviously met and worked with y'all over there at Zero Eyes. So it's just the beginning, and we got a huge groundwork ahead of us to lay and keep moving forward. So I'm excited.
Yeah, no, that's I love your experience. I love your background. Obviously, coming from the military, that translation now to kind of civilian life is probably a little bit challenging at some points, but you bring so much experience from what you went through, and you're bringing it to your hometown now. And going through, you hinted on it, going through that event 20 years ago, Combine. We'll talk about that here in a second, but you bring so much credibility now going through that military life to civilian life, but also all the resources and tools, and then learning under your predecessor before you. I'm sure he had a great plan, and probably was a great mentor for you, which has led to kind of national recognition for you guys over at Littleton, which is exciting. And I forgot to mention this, Mike, you did have a baby boy recently. So Colt, for everyone listening, he just had a baby boy. So congratulations again to you and your wife. I'm sure it's a beautiful, healthy baby boy.
It is. Like I just told you before too, I thought I had a lack of sleep before, but I'm just now finding out what sleep deprivation is. But, it's a blessing, definitely a miracle, and, God's gift to us. So I wouldn't ask for anything else.
Mike's running on like 2 hours of sleep. He's like, Taylor, it's Friday, man. Like, come on. I need to go back to bed.
A long weekend ahead of me.
There you go, man. There you go. Well, cool, dude. I mean, you gave me a little background about what you've done at LPS, but how do you view, I guess, your role at LPS, and, how do you view just security in general in a K-12 environment?
Yeah, it's a great question. Something that brought over from the military side to even where we are now in the K-12 industry, security differs from different fields, whether it's healthcare, education, industrial. But there's one concept that kind of stays consistent, and that's a holistic all hazards approach to it. And that's really what we focus on here. What are the fundamental layers that we need to protect our students and staff to really deter, detect, delay, and deny any incident that can occur? One of the biggest things for us over here in LPS is, community cohesion and partnerships with our first responders. We do have a 24/7 security operations center that is staffed, around the clock by our team in here. As I mentioned prior to that, we monitor unified security systems, everything from video surveillance, visitor management, life safety through fire suppression systems, HVAC. It really is centralized in here, but there's a huge, reliance and partnership that's been built with our community first responders. And when I took over, that was really one of my top priorities, is to really repair fragmented relationships that may have existed here and there. We hired on our assistant director, came over from 27 years law enforcement experience to really help fill that void. I didn't come from civilian law enforcement, so how can I help fill that void and really bridge that gap and communicate with our administrators, our first responders, and all be on the same page? Really every day I come here, I plan for the worst, hope for the best, and I pray for, a positive outcome, on a day in and day out basis. One of the greatest ways that we can kind of achieve that is through, creating a culture and a climate that really embraces small incidents from your, average slips, trips, falls, weather-related incidents. So that way, if a large-scale incident ever occurs, such as your active threat incident, bomb threat, whatever it may be, your team, your staff, your students are mentally prepared and ready to kind of go through that process. And something I train our staff on, when we go through our standard response protocol training on a yearly basis, is understand the fundamental, concepts of it. What are your initial steps? If you go into a lockdown, is it, lock slides out of sight? If we're insecure, everybody inside, lock outside doors. Focus on the basic concepts, because our students and staff rely on us to be able to make those, discretionary calls and decisions, and let the more complex decision-making process come from us over here at the district administration, your principal and administrators, but more importantly, our first responders from law enforcement, fire, EMS. And really, to kind of tie that all back in together, it's, giving everybody a voice. And our first responders in a lot of school districts nowadays really don't have a voice at the table. They don't have a seat at the table to voice their concerns. And they, they're professionals. They know what they're talking about. They know what they're doing. They have great ideas, great recommendations. Part of us over here in LPS, we were blessed to be able to pass a $280 million bond, which really we reinvested and got $330 million out of But sitting down with our law enforcement partners, we're able to provide them, law enforcement Knox boxes. Turns out the fire department doesn't like to share. Law enforcement, red and blue, I guess they don't meet, they clash.
Right.
So we provided that, rapid entry to all of our schools, as well as tactical door numbering systems. They know what they're talking about. And for us here, we're kind of acting as that liaison between educators and our law enforcement personnel.
I love that, man. And the first thing you hinted on was coming from that holistic approach. The same thing that Captain Rick Francis says, same thing that Mike Petranga says. And then you said everyone should have a voice at the seat of the table. I love that. Everyone's got to be in synergy. Everyone has to have full streamlined communication when it comes to security in the K-12 environment. Because, this, Mike. We're going to talk about this in a second, but like the active shooter problem, the bomb threat problem, going to school now as a kid is a little bit different than it was 10 years ago when you and I went to school, right? So let's talk about that. Let's talk about what happened 20 years ago. It's a sensitive topic. I know people don't like talking about active shootings. Just last week, they had a shooting up here in Dallas and Mansfield, or an active shooting threat. Kid pulls out a weapon in a fight, and then obviously, it blew up on the news. But let's talk about Combine 20 years ago. Since then, what has been the plan for active shooter threats and active assailants now in a K-12 environment from Combine? What have you learned from that, scenario?
Yeah. And, it is a sensitive topic in the K-12 industry, but it's an important topic, an important conversation that needs to be had. In the Denver metropolitan area, we've had an anomaly as far as active shooter events and active threat events that have occurred in this relatively small geographic area. I don't know what it is out here. I don't know what really transpires, but it all kind of dates back to 20 years ago when Columbine occurred. There's always a nexus, some sort that relates back to either that incident, Virginia Tech, whatever it may be. And I think it really just boils down, to be prepared on an all hazards, holistic approach. What are your layers? You need interdependencies at each individual level itself. In my belief, it really begins with access control, communications, and video surveillance. Here, access control can be broken down into whether you have a secure vestibule, compartmentalization. And part of our bond process, like I said, we're blessed to have a supporting community out here that unanimously voted to approve that. But we're installing, secure vestibules at all of our, middle school and elementary schools. And that really just provides, a safe containment area for visitors or, individuals coming in during the school day to be vetted and kind of direct dialogue and communication with the staff members before being allowed ingress into the facility. It's just one layer upon that. At the secondary level, today's high school campuses are yesterday's college campuses. Everything from open campus appeal, students coming and going throughout the day. The big question that I had when we worked with our security integrators in the architectural design committee is, how do we provide that secure vestibule component on an open campus? And it's not an easy solution, but the answer for us was compartmentalization. Really multiple ingress points. You really can't secure a school 100%. You can alarm the doors, you can put door contact sensors, but you cannot secure that school 100%. So what we did for our high schools is we compartmentalized them off into sections. So there's an active threat event that occurs. We have fire and lockdown doors that lock, and they're either storefront with access control that only permitted individuals such as our team here in district security and law enforcement can ingress through. It's just providing that time barrier that's needed for first responders. In a urban area like we are in Littleton, our average law enforcement response time is 2 to 3 minutes. We're blessed to have school resource officers, so that comes down to seconds that you can put, a gun on a bad guy with a firearm. We all know that's the best way to approach a situation when it occurs. But on top of that, even access controls. Do your classrooms and doors have push button locks? Coming from the Sandy Hook Commission, that was a best practice that all schools should implement, is the ability to lock a classroom from the inside of your classroom, not having the teacher go outside, put a key in and lock it. That's precious time that we need to save. Visitor management as well kind of falls into that access control component. How are you vetting individuals prior to providing access to your schools? Do you give them stickers? Do you have color breakaway lanyards that easily identifies them as a visitor there? Are they being vetted against the sex offender registry? And second part, communications. This is the big one for me. Any incident that occurs, communication is what's going to get our first responding partners here in an expedited fashion. Everything from communications breaks down to the school level. Do you have UHF radios for all your staff? Who has the radios? Does your principal have a radio? Do they leave it on their desk charging all day, which happens?
Right.
For us here, we do operate on the state trunk radio system. So we have an 800 megahertz radio in all of our schools. as well as all of our transportations, maintenance, operation personnel, our district incident command team. And lessons learned from 2013, when an incident occurs, you have that preemption priority access to, cell towers and nets, and that gets throttled down. So you're only having first responders being able to access that, which truly hinders your ability to communicate. Another layer into that is Wi-Fi services. Everybody jumps on Wi-Fi, so now you're going to crash your Wi-Fi. Our IT department had to throttle it down and basically section off and turn Wi-Fi down to different buildings so they can segregate it to essential personnel. The 800 megahertz radios allowed us uninterrupted communications. We actively monitor law enforcement nets in here, which allows us to expedite our response time in the event of a emergency. Let law enforcement respond to what they have to. Let us provide the communications, because we're focused on the schools. They're focused on the bad guy or criminal that's fleeing from them. Another layer, mass notification.
Right.
What mass notification do you have in place? Is it localized? Strobes, PA system? Does all staff have the ability to? And for us here, we operate on Valcom system. All of our lockdown initiatives are really, automated over that system. You hit the button, it's going to come over strobes and a repeating audible voice until law enforcement requests to turn it off. But more importantly, too, how do you communicate with parents? We implemented school messenger system here, so we're able to send expedited text and email responses out to parents, staff members, students, essentially critical personnel here on the incident command team for our district side. That just gets the response process rolling. You get people moving, you get the notification sent out. Parents are gonna, they're gonna be worried. And in any incident like that, you're never gonna be faster than a student on social media sending text messages out. They have their phones. But how can we get out as fast as we can and send basic information out at the time? Hey, our school is insecure due to law enforcement activity in the area, or is it a lockdown? And then we'll follow it up on the back end with a more summarized event list of what happened. But the important thing is getting that communication out to parents. If you have to reunify, you don't want parents flooding to the school. So communicate with them so the transparency is there. Hey, this is where we're going to reunify. Go to this location. Please don't come to our schools and impede our law enforcement and first responders. Two other things. The big one for us, anonymous reporting tip line. In the state of Colorado, we do have Safe to Tell, and that kind of came from the Columbine Commission as a best practice. A lot of states don't have that, and a lot of schools and districts have to basically provide that on their own. P3 tips. I know Mike Matrenga down in Texas City ISD used that for his school district down there. That's what drives Safe to Tell itself. It's all comprised of the P3 tip database, but just providing an anonymous tip line for students to voice their concerns. You're going to catch a lot of stuff. You're going to have a lot of positive outcomes. And more importantly, you're going to have your law enforcement officers engaged in that process. And, finally, the other big one for us is school resource officers. And I know
Amen.
It's sad to say this has become such a controversial topic nationwide. And it really, it's interesting to see the direction some places are heading. But for us, we have a strong partnership, and probably one of the strongest with our adjacent districts, with our law enforcement partners. Our Board of Education, our superintendent, our department, we all support that and understand the role that they play and provide for a safe schools environment. We're lucky to have the Region 10 director for NASRO as one of our SROs here at Arapahoe High School. So all of our SROs are basic and advanced SRO trained through NASRO. They focus on a more kind of a holistic approach to school resource officer, or to be a school resource officer, everything from informal counseling, being a teacher, mental health provider, as well as a law enforcement official. So they're really, I guess, ingrained in the school community. They're ingrained in the climate, the culture. They're an integral part of it. And, just the other day I was in one of our SRO's offices, and a student came in and said, "Hey, sir, I really want to be a cop. What do I need to do?" And it's like, that's the information that needs to get out and that the community needs to be aware of. I've had students come up to him before when I was there, and I said, "Hey, sir, the only reason I'm graduating school is because of you. You positively impacted my life, and you made a drastic impact and changed the trajectory of where I was going." So that's the stuff that I wish people start to focus on, not the school to prison pipeline and everything else in between. But it's a crazy world we live in today.
No, dude, it is. And everything you said, you're spot on. And I 100% agree with it. It's almost sad that we even have to have a conversation about ripping and replacing SROs. There's so many school districts I've talked to or listen to, and it's like they make it about politics, or they make it about perception. And I agree, perception is reality, but like an SRO is like the heart and soul in a district, because they're the first line of defense. they develop that rapport and that relationship with the student. And already it seems like got great stories about students already, being like they're role models essentially, right? They're being role models for the students and staff inside the building. So a huge component of that. I guess, Mike, do you feel like, I mean, you touched on a lot of different technologies and procedures you use, but do you feel like an active shooter or like an expelled student or like a sex offender is like the biggest threat in a K through 12 environment? And I guess like, what's that advice then? I know you mentioned a lot of different things around that, but you feel like that's the biggest threat right now in K through 12? Is it mass shooting or is it an expelled student or what is it?
That's a great question. It's kind of twofold. I think, one of the biggest concerns and risks that we face nowadays is the mental health, mental health issue and crisis, everything from COVID, which exacerbated it, to, school threats and school violence. I do think a high degree, I guess a large concern of ours is and will always be active shooting events. It's polarizing. You have people that are focusing on it, and those thoughts for people over the last year while they're, quarantined, remote learning, they didn't go away. That stuff still manifested, and you see a spike, kind of occurring nationwide right now. I talked about secure vestibules. I talked about, the importance of access control layers, but let's be honest, 92 to 97% of active threat events at schools occur inside the school itself. It's a student who knows the processes, they know the procedures. And that's really where I feel, the mental health crisis, the mental health intervention and prevention comes into play. I mean, it's terrible to say the wolf's in the hen's house and they're already in there. They know how to navigate it. They know where the vulnerabilities are. They know how to kind of circumvent what's there. And kind of a plug for you and your company at ZeroWise. This is why we ventured down that path. And this is why I looked into ZeroWise. Really, what are those, how do we identify something, the left of bang indications before a gunshot goes off? In ZeroWise, their motto, identification and detection at first sight, not first shot. That's what sold it for me. And that's why I wanted to migrate that direction, is how do we put those prevention measures in place? And like I said, I think it's just directly tied mental health concerns, threat assessments, as well as the active threat event that's so pervasive in today's world that we face.
What has been the perception, Mike? Appreciate the plug, by the way, at ZeroWise. It always helps. But no, what has like you mentioned all these things you're doing at LPS. What's the perception or response been from the community, the staff, the students around improving safety and security in the district? Has it been good? Has it been negative? Because sometimes like when Santa Fe ISD happened, I know those guys. I love those guys down there. You know what they did? They put metal detectors inside the school. Well, now being a kid, walking through a metal detector, it's like going to the airport, going through TSA. So what has that been a response been from the community about all these procedures and policies you put in place?
Yeah. And, I'll give a plug to Mike Matranga. A couple of years back, he did his Senate hearing. He kind of talked in depth on, metal detectors and their role they kind of play, creating secondary soft targets, not being able to secure the school itself. And that's just for a lot of schools. I know people always venture down that path, metal detectors, anytime an incident happens. And there's no one piece fit all to solve this, puzzle and dilemma that we're in. But out here, and I think we have a unique dynamic with our community. I think a lot of people understand, and we're security proactive as far as a whole with our school staff, students, and community, because we did experience an active threat event. And we saw the drastic impact it had on us. We tragically lost the life of an innocent student. And for me, in my role, I swore that that'll never occur again. So long as I'm here, I'll do whatever I have to do to keep, protective measures in place, whether it be on mental health side, working with our social emotional team, or more on the security proactive side through AI analytics and technology. We're transparent with our community. We don't really hide anything from them. We're taxpayer funded. They provided the bond, which provided millions of dollars of security technology, new facilities. We're building 4 new schools and a new CEC Career Enhancement Center. So we're transparent to the point where we can't compromise our safety and security standards, but they understand where we're coming from and the processes that we put in place. Our Board of Education is also extremely supportive. They empower our superintendent, who empowers me to make decisions that I need to make in order to put our students and staff as a first priority for anything safety and security related. I do operate through consultative input with our learning services team, because any decision I make will somewhat impact our principals, administrators, teachers. So it's always good, and on my end, to always circle them and get their thoughts on it, to make sure that you're not coming down with an iron fist and trying to rule from above, but really getting a collaborative approach and getting consensus on the decisions that we're making.
That's I love that, man, and it's reassuring to let a superintendent and a board actually let you do your job effectively and give you the tools and trust you. Right? I mean, you know how Mike feels about this topic. Mike Petrang has definitely been vocal about what he feels about the board, and that's why he's on the board now. You know, he's a school board member. So we'll see.
Saw that. Yep.
We'll see how well he goes. But
Congrats to him.
good, great answer there, Mike. And I guess I don't. I thought about eliminating this question, man, because we're all sick of it. But like, I'll go ahead and ask you real quick. The pandemic, the COVID challenge. Dude, what is? I'm so sick of talk about COVID, man. But what have you done since COVID throughout the district?
It is beating a drum now, but it's a conversation that we need to have and a question that needs to be brought up. I was hoping the school year would come in fresh, nothing COVID related. Made it a couple weeks in, and lo and behold, we're where we are.
Right.
For us here, and I have to give a plug to our superintendent staff and our superintendent. He handled this situation with COVID phenomenally. What he did, though, is he didn't come in and make a decision, backtrack and say, hey, this is what the school wants, but our public health officials want something different. He waited until our public health officials and Colorado Department of Public Health and Environment made their decision, and then he drove his off theirs. So it wasn't us operating in a silo. It was everybody kind of coming together and trying to align practices the best we could. For us, emergency planning, everybody had a pandemic or a flu influenza kind of emergency operations plan. Nobody really projected out for a pandemic of this magnitude. And I think for me, one of the biggest things I did, yes, emergency planning is my forte and it falls under our wheelhouse, but checking my ego at the door, understanding that I'm not the subject matter expert for public health. And empowering our special services team and student services team who has our school nurse liaisons and everybody fall underneath them, and letting them make the decisions based on their experiences, their practices, and professional experiences that they had. But for us here, in security, one of the hardest things to get through to all of our teachers and staff members is you can't compromise security for convenience of propping a door, letting ventilation get in. The amount of security that you're risking for a tiny bit of fresh air, it doesn't outweigh one or the other.
Right.
You always have to be on the security line. And, we invested thousands of dollars in HEPA air filters to promote that, air filtration systems. But for us, as a whole, it's kind of ironic. One of my priorities, like I said, was working with law enforcement. And from that, I created what's known as, GRG maps or grid reference guide mapping systems with our sheriff's department and police department. And it provides them a QR coding layout of our schools, different maps, ingress points. And on that, we went around and labeled all of our doors external in the district. So everything kind of starts at the main entrance. Door 1 works its way around counterclockwise. And I integrated that into the maps. Well, lo and behold, during COVID, we had soft starts. So parents were showing up at their classroom doors, different points of entry at the building to provide that social distancing. So secondary layer of that, it was used more by our parents, teachers, and staff to say, hey, pick your kid up at door 6 today. This is where they're going to ingress and egress from. Ended up working out fantastic. Never made it for that, reasoning or approach, but it ended up working phenomenally. Another thing we did, mandatory ID badges for our secondary students. We never really mandated ID badges that had to be worn at all times for middle and high school students. And during the COVID pandemic, we mandated it because of masking. We had to identify who's in our schools because we're in a city. A lot of people come across our campuses, either former students, current students that aren't, affiliated with that specific school. But I think this is a practice that's going to stick, and it really is a best practice to have, secondary students wear ID badges at all times. And, for us, one of the biggest things that I kind of found out during this time is vendors trying to capitalize on this specific market, everything fever screening.
You're telling me, dude. Here we go. Open up the worms. Here we go.
So all I got to say about that is for schools, a lot of people are ambulance chasing. There's unscrupulous vendors out there trying to capitalize on a market. Do your due diligence, do your research. Pass K-12 did a phenomenal white paper on it that basically broke down what you should and shouldn't have based on the FDA requirements. That's where I'm going to leave it, but my phone blows up probably 30 times a day with vendors trying to sell me their software and cameras. And I'm like, all right, I have hesitations and reservations about it. So we haven't ventured down that path yet.
Mic drop, baby. Nothing but the this is why I have him on my podcast. That's why I call my podcast Nothing But the Truth, man. Because that's why I started.
Absolutely.
Because of COVID, this, man. So many those snake oil companies, man, want to get a quick buck and they want to promote the latest and greatest.
Absolutely.
Solve all your problems. But a couple good things there, Mike, that you said. You're not the health expert, you're not the medical expert, so what you were hinting on is you're staying in your lane. You know, you're the security emergency planning expert, and you consult the right people that are good at what they do and bring them in for a collaborative effort. And I love that because, again, I talk about that all the time. You know, stay in your lane, focus on what you can do great at, and then be your subject matter expert in your swim lane. And I think you've done that very, very well. And obviously, you handled COVID now very well, very well. And that's a lesson to any kind of vendor now. That watches this episode wants to attack Mike with the latest and greatest technology. You better have a good sales pitch if you're going to get this guy, man. I'll tell you out the bat.
Amen.
Well, cool, man. A couple other last questions here. You know, I guess you walked into LPS. You bring a lot of credibility now. You have a lot of experience. You've done great things for the LPS school district beyond what your predecessor did. You've now enhanced that even further and got you guys now more nationally recognized. But I guess, you know, from day one to where you are now, what's the one piece of advice you wish you would have had at day one to where you are now?
That's a phenomenal question. You know, I think the biggest advice that I kind of had back then that I learned over time is, you know, don't do this on your own. You know, K through 12 security, it's really a community approach, and something that we advocate, you know, to our staff, students, and everybody else is safety is a community effort. It takes a team, and, you know, for us here in LPS, every week we meet and we call it our Vortex meeting. It's our team in here in security, our social emotional team, our IT team, because we, you know, monitor student Google accounts through a third-party company, as well as our secondary education director. Sometimes we, you know, loop in law enforcement. And what this allows us to do is really go over behavioral analysis, threat assessments, threat screeners, mental health concerns, suicide risk reviews, and put everything together from more of a 10,000-foot view looking down. And a lot of times allows us to put pieces together if there's, you know, correlation between child abuse cases, suicide risk reviews, threat assessments. How can we provide, you know, extra layers to help the students, set them up for success, you know, create safety plans? But as I said, this, you know, it's a team approach, no matter what we do. And two other teams that we kind of put together and started here in LPS are our safe school design teams. And really that's, you know, quarterly meeting. We get together district leadership, community leaders, community partners to include students and parents. A lot of times when you go through these meetings, students and parents are kind of left out of the equation.
Right.
And students know better than any of us, whether they teach you about social media, they bring up concerns, what works from them. And a lot of times if you get buy-in from a student and they sell it back to their other, you know, or their other students and counterparts, you'll get a lot more buy-in from students about propping doors, you know, wearing ID badges, checking in with staff, you know, speaking to administrators. And our parents had that unique approach to voice their concern of what they're seeing in the community, but allows us to all come together. You know, another meeting that we do, quarterly SRO meetings. As I mentioned, we're sold with our SROs here. They're an integral part of our safety and security approach, as well as our, you know, community and culture that we've ingrained. On a quarterly basis, we get all of our school resource officers together, their leadership on both sides from the sheriff's department as well as PD, and our superintendent and our leadership team here. You know, what concerns do they have? What's going on that they've noticed? How's their day going? During COVID, we still had meetings virtually, but they were out there, you know, serving patrol duties because our schools were remote, but they're still prioritizing, you know, welfare checks for students, responding to safe to tell checks, responding to our student Google account monitoring alerts. They're doing more than they ever did before because they still had to prioritize, you know, traffic, patrol, whatever else they're doing. And I think, you know, the biggest thing for me is to create that safety mindset. Like I said, safety is a community approach, and it really involves everybody. So that's something that I wish, you know, I knew back then, kind of learned over the last 3.5 years, but it really takes everybody. It takes a village to make sure that our schools are safe and secure. And any given day, our schools are the safest places you can be. Your travel to and from school is much more dangerous, statistically speaking, than sitting in a class learning for a day. Right. But our job is to reassure our students, provide that, you know, safe and, you know, secure environment so they can learn. You know, statistics and studies show students who feel safe and secure are better learners. They score higher on tests. They're more, you know, proactive. They're more involved. They want to come to school. And that's our job to provide that environment.
I love it, man. I love everything you just said. And I think there's one person that, besides Mike, yourself, your colleague, Mark, has done a lot too for LPS. So I want to give a shout out to Mark Edson. He's a great dude, obviously heavily influenced in NASRO and the SRO team that you guys have. And I love that too about SROs, because I feel like SROs, man, they do a lot more than what's on that typical job description of an SRO that no one knows about. And you just hinted on some of those things that they do. which is great. So huge support of SROs again. Everything that they do is enhancing and making sure that students, staff, and yourself are always safe at any time throughout the day. I guess, Mike, my last question, man, it's kind of a simple question. You've hinted on it pretty much the whole episode is, you're still young. You're not retiring anytime soon, unless, maybe you win the lottery and you say, you know what, I'm done. I'm hanging up my hat. But what's the legacy, man, of Mike Newton? What do you want to leave here in the security industry that you let everyone know?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing for me coming into it is security directors need to be empowered to make their decisions, work with their leadership teams, not be hindered to make the right decisions, not the popular decisions, but the right decisions. For me, for security directors, don't be afraid to be innovative and reach out to technology companies. I'm a huge believer in SaaS, or software as a solution. I think it's the future of the security industry. The more districts start to open up the door to that, understand the role that it plays, but don't be afraid to reach out to these companies to kind of learn more about the software. When I took over this, obviously, my predecessor was here for 30 years. And my number one rule for anybody in here is if I ask a question and the answer is, well, that's the way it's always been, there's no better indicator that change has to happen or change needs to happen. So let's stay up with times. Let's kind of learn and work with our other districts. And for me here, I'm a huge believer in something else that other districts nationwide need to kind of believe in and understand too, is coordinate and work with your, sister and adjacent districts. I'm a huge fan in uniformity. There's so many companies out there selling products, soft panic devices on cell phones, but it doesn't help law enforcement when they have 5 jurisdictions for schools that fall underneath them. And they have 5 different schools using 5 different applications. Now, all law enforcement is trying to download different applications. So coordinate with your fellow school districts, your adjacent school districts, figure out a solution that works for everybody. At the end of the day, we're trying to simplify law enforcement's life. And if they can respond quicker and we're all operating on the same, common cohesive ground, it's much better for everybody as a whole.
Unified, man. We got to make it unified. And I 100%
Absolutely
makes it streamlined, makes it autonomous, makes it easy of use. So I love that answer. I guess, Mike, man, you're spot on with everything you said, dude. Probably that's why I wanted to have you on my podcast. So I thank you again, man, for hopping and taking the time to speak with me. I guess I typically, at the end of episodes, I typically ask my customers and my contacts for contact information. I'm going to leave that up to you if you want to share that or not, because I don't want people blowing you up. You already get people blowing you up constantly, but if there's people that want to get more information about you or maybe just have a conversation, how can they get a hold of you?
Yeah, I appreciate that. So if anybody's interested in kind of getting a hold of us, anybody here on our team, you can go to littletonpublicschools.net and really just go to the safety and security emergency planning sublink on that. You have my contact information, our assistant director, Mark Edson, as well as anybody else in our team. So feel free to reach out. We're happy to help. We're an open book. If you have any questions, comments, concerns, if you're trying to build a school resource officer program, even if you have mental health questions, I'll put you in contact with our director of social and emotional behavioral services. We're happy to help. LPS, we share what we know, and anything you need, let us know.
Man, that was a very diplomatic answer. I love it, dude. Very, very clean and polished. No, awesome. Mike, again, thank you, brother. Appreciate the time. And for those that have questions, comments, or concerns, you can email me at info@securityvip.net. Once again, that's info@securityvip.net. This episode of Mike and I will be on YouTube. It's posted on Spotify as well as LinkedIn. So when you're on the road, you can check us out on Security VIP Podcast. Make sure to stay tuned with the next episode release. Stay safe, guys. Recognize. You wanna talk that shit?